Valter Longo, thank you so much for joining us on the show. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very good, thanks. I have to say, I've been a huge fan of yours for a long time. I first started getting into fasting and reading your book. Then I tried the fasting-mimicking diet, done that loads of times, and the Prolon, and have intermittent fasted ever since, and feel great on it. Want to sort of come to some of the basics of what you do in a second, but I probably read that book originally 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And I wonder what's exciting you in the fasting and longevity space at the moment? What recent developments are getting you really excited?
Yeah, I would say something that we expected, which is that you cannot just be enthusiastic about fasting, like you cannot be enthusiastic about eating. And so I think, as we expected, it's turning out to be, what are we talking about? How are you using, what kind of fasting, how long, and or fasting mimic, what we call fasting mimicking diet, and then who do you use it on, and for what reason, right? So I think that we learned, for example, and I think most people agree that if you do 16 hours of fasting and you skip breakfast, that's not good, right? It's probably going to make your life shorter. And so a lot of people do this, and they probably shouldn't. But now if you do 12 hours or maybe 13 hours of fasting, that seems to be solidified. There's a lot of data now showing benefits. So that's one exciting thing. So something very simple, like say 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Something in that range. I think Sachin Panda would push more for the 13 hours of fasting. I push more for the 12, but I think we hopefully agree on each other's length. And then the fasting mimicking diet, so for those that don't know, the idea was really to turn fasting into a medicine, right? Or
Mm.
something that can be preventive or therapeutic. And so the fasting mimicking diet now has been tested in over 40 clinical trials in many universities that are doing this independently of any commercial interest, right? They're just universities that are testing this. And so that's good. That's what we want. And I think now we're moving towards um, fairly conclusive evidence against diabetes, pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome. We're starting to see data now on cancer. It's still early for cancer, but this data we published, or University of Rome did a small trial on kidney disease, a patient that looks very, very promising.
Mm.
And so there's going to be, I think, 3 studies this year on 3 clinical studies on autoimmunities done in the US and Europe. So yeah, so a lot of clinical trials, and a lot of them are backing up the use of fasting, specific type of fasting, especially the 12, 13 hours daily, and the periodic fasting mimicking diet, 5 days of a plant-based, low sugar, low protein, high fat, diet.
Mm. Were you saying then before that you thought 12 hours is better than 16 or 18 hours now? Surely 18 hours is better, isn't it?
Well, yeah, short term is better, right? So yeah, if you do 16 hours, some people do 22 hours, right? So
Mm.
yeah, of course, if you only eat once a day for 2 hours, you're gonna get bigger effects much quicker. The problem is that what's gonna happen long term, right? So maybe there is a reason that we have 4 meals a day, let's say 3 and plus a snack, or some
Mm.
people maybe 2 snacks. And there's some data from some years ago that indicated that skipping any meal could be problematic, right? And it was associated with a shortening of lifespan. So so I think that you don't necessarily want the quick results. You don't want to necessarily get there quickly and then have problems later. You want to get there more slowly, get there, and then live long and healthy, right? That's the idea. So for that, I think the 12, 13 hours of fasting seems to be much more feasible. Not too many people, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but not too many people do 16 hours or 18 hours or 20 hours, right? Most people that I know have difficulties long term removing 1 cup of coffee a day, right? So if somebody drinks 3, it's not that easy to say, okay, now I'm gonna have to drink 2, right? So we follow thousands of patients in the clinics that we have in the US and Europe, And most people don't want to be deprived of certain things. They like it, and they don't care. They don't care if it's got problems associated with it, right? So I think, yeah, we need to find things that are feasible. And so, yeah, I would say 70% of people can probably do 12 hours
Mm.
of fasting per day, and but I think very few people can do 16, 18 hours.
Mm. I mean, certainly once I started tuning into your work, it's amazing once you start finishing eating a little bit earlier in the evening. Then when you go out for a late dinner, you sort of you feel it, really feel it in your stomach when you go to bed and you've started tuning into how it feels.
Yeah, obviously, keeping away from your sleep time is important. I say 3 or 4 hours, and don't eat after that 3 or 4 hour time point, and
Mm.
so before going to sleep. Yeah, so yeah, as you violate that, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's another thing I think in the clinic we make clear. Like, don't be obsessed with, I can never eat at 11 p.m. or at midnight or 2 a.m. You can. You just, 99% of the times don't do it. And if there is a reason why you got to be out and do it, it will change absolutely nothing. um, Now, with the exception, I wrote an article some time ago. The exception is holidays, right? I mean, it's really remarkable if you look at the data on holidays. There are two peaks of cardiovascular events, right? And one is Christmas Day, and one is New Year's Eve or day, right? So it is possible that if you really
Is it?
exaggerate, yeah, you see two clear peaks, and this is very well confirmed in the data, in the databases. Yeah, so then it may be that, if you just go like way out of the over the limit, that's enough to cause, like a stroke or a heart attack, right? Just because it's massive. People
Mm.
sometimes in these holidays eat massive levels of food, so I'm saying this because I just say the opposite. I go one event. Well, yeah, that one event you can violate things, but don't be careful, right? Because it's not like a Christmas Day or whenever. It's not a free day where you can eat whatever you want. That may be enough for some people to cause a problem, and this is why we see these massive peaks.
Wow, that is extraordinary, isn't it? Um, yeah. Okay. Well, in terms of you mentioned cancer there, and I know that you are excited about fasting and cancer therapy. What's sort of latest research looking like in terms of fasting or fasting mimicking diets and cancer?
Yeah, so we and many have abandoned the water only fasting and cancer idea maybe 10 years ago. I've seen very, very few trials. We tried, and it was very difficult to recruit any patients, right? And there was one of the ideas for developing a fasting mimicking diet. Now, so with the fasting mimicking diet, there's a lot of trials, and a number of them are very positive, like especially those on triple negative breast cancer, and that's where most of the trials have been, right? So this very aggressive type of breast cancer, and the group here in Milan shown in multiple clinical trials that women that did chemotherapy alone did worse or much worse than women that did chemotherapy plus the fasting mimicking diet. And this is matching, of course, many studies by many laboratories in mice, showing that using either fasting or fasting mimicking diet is making lots of different therapies: immunotherapy, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, kinase inhibitor, hormone therapy, and make it better or much better, right? So they often generate what's called synergism, meaning that the combination is much greater than, or the effect of the combination is much greater than the sum of each
Mm.
component.
And there is a thought that chemo needs fast dividing cells to work, and fasting might sometimes interrupt that process. Is that something that is on your radar?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ideas out there, right? So we spent 20 years doing that, and now it's like 20 different labs None of us have ever seen that, right? What
Mm.
we've seen is the opposite over and over and over. Now, the only concern I've seen, and which we had proposed many years ago, was don't combine refeeding with toxic molecules like chemotherapy, right? Why? Because lots of systems in the human body, like in the mouse, they tend to shrink or be reduced in size during the fasting, right?
Mm.
Then you have sort of the opposite of you were saying, right? You have a rapid proliferation during the refeeding. When you do that, you do not want to have chemo in the system, right? And that's not good, right? Because why? Because now you have rapid proliferation and carcinogenic substances
Mm.
together. And this is
Yes.
why, for example, there was a group, I think it was in the UK, that showed if you do alternate day fasting, and again, we go back to you need to know what you're doing. So we have shown that if you do long fasting and you do chemo, let's say you do 3 days of fasting, 2 days, 3 days of fasting in mice, right? And then you do chemo, they're very much protected from chemo, right? Especially the cardiotoxic chemotherapy like doxorubicin. But this group showed exactly what we will have predicted. If you do alternate day fasting and you combine the chemo with the refeeding, now the cardiotoxicity increases. Instead of decreasing cardiotoxicity, now you're increasing just by going from a long fast to a short alternative fast. So alternate day feeding or fasting is now causing problems, whereas long-term fasting is causing, and that is causing protection. And that's exactly what you will have predicted based on the science.
Mm. It must excite you so much. I mean, this is a biohacking news podcast, and I've been looking at all sorts of stories. And, fasting has the whole conversation around fasting has changed so much since you wrote your book on longevity.
Yeah, I mean, now fasting, and it's not just my work, but I think certainly Mark Madsen and Sachin Panda and Rafa De Cabo and a group of us have done a lot of work, clinical and preclinical, and I think that maybe for the first time we are now seeing fasting done the right way,
Mm.
carefully with the professionals, moving into the possibility of mainstream medicine, right? In the
Mm.
toolbox of the physician, a lot of integrative medicine doctors are saying,
Yeah.
I use it. Sometimes I think they're still misusing it, like 16 hours keeping breakfast. But I think we're trying to educate them, and I think more so the clinical trials are gonna educate them, right? So now you have many trials on, for example, I wrote a review where I included both time restricted eating, so the 12 hours, and the fasting mimicking diet to treat diabetes and alternate day fasting. And so I concluded that there is now a lot of papers that are suggesting that both the 12-hour time restricted eating and or say 13, 14-hour time restricted eating and the fasting mimicking diet can be effective in treating obesity and diabetes. So we need more, but I think that we're starting to accumulate the type of data that physicians all over the world have been requiring for hundreds of years and never
Mm.
happened, right? So now I think that soon enough there's going to be a critical mass, and we're going to start seeing the first uses of this in the clinic as a standard, right? Now the good news for the patient is that instead of managing the disease, like let's say GLP-1 drugs, right? So a lot of drugs manage diabetes, manage obesity. They're not really there to cure the patient. And so now, hopefully, this diet and fasting-based intervention, like we've seen, they're causing diabetes regression, obesity regression, and they're causing it without the loss of muscle mass, right? So if you look at the data from GLP-1 receptor agonists, you see muscle loss and you see a lot of side effects. You don't see that either with the 12-hour time restricted eating or with the fasting mimicking diet. So that's very good news. And I encourage people to be more demanding with the doctors and say, yeah, you can give me the drug that keeps me diabetic for the next 30 years, or please help me get back to full health. And I think most people can do it.
And I wasn't going to ask you about GLP-1, but since you brought them up, what do you think of the GLP-1 drugs? I believe there are some longevity doctors who are quite interested in using GLP-1 for longevity at a completely different dosage level.
It's a big mistake, right? It's a big mistake. And I was recently invited by the Novo Nordisk Foundation, or certainly scientists at Novo Nordisk. So I presented there. And my point was GLP-1 receptor agonists are powerful drugs, and they have a use, right? And the use should be when everything else doesn't work, right? Dietary wise. But it shouldn't be the way we do it now, because now we really don't have trained physicians, meaning the physicians are trained, but not trained in lifestyle, right? So if you go to an endocrinologist, the endocrinologist does not have the time, nor does he have the skills to follow you and bring you back with dietary intervention. Now, most insurances around the world don't cover very much the diet expert, and most of the diet experts don't know anything about fasting, right? So it's really, now we're basically forced to give GLP-1 because we have nothing else, right? So the system should be like, okay, let's train people that understand fasting, understand nutrition, understand how that can help in a non-invasive way. So for example, in southern Italy now, we're almost done with a 500 patient trial. Southern Italy now, Calabria is one of the worst in Europe for obesity and overweight, right? Even children have record obesity. But the way we intervened was, let's just give you a fasting mimicking diet for 5 days, once every 3 months. It's a big gamble, right? Because like, come on, every 3 months, every 90 days, is it possible that I do something for 5 days? We'll see, right? We don't have the
Yeah.
results yet, but it's looking, the potential is looking very good. We're optimistic.
Wow.
So I'm saying, that is the alternative to Ozempic, right? I mean, you have to come up with something that is so doable. 12 hours. Come on, I understand if you go to the endocrinology and you're obese and your endocrinologist says you gotta fast for 18 hours a day, nobody's going to do it. But if you say you gotta, can you do 12 hours? I would say most people will say, yeah, I could probably do that, right? Can you do it for the rest of your life? Yes, I could probably do that for the rest of my life. That's already a big victory. And then you add
Yeah.
the fasting mimicking diet maybe every 3 months. And that, I think, can already revolutionize. Two very simple, doable things can revolutionize the health of millions of people.
Wow. That's going to be a very interesting study to see what happens in Calabria.
Yep. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. And just to be clear, you're saying that 16 hours is better than 12, but most people can't do 16, so it's actually worse because they end up just not doing anything. Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that
Yeah.
16 hours causes metabolic changes. So whether
Does
it's
it?
fat loss, maybe you're insulin resistant,
Mm.
you'll see it quicker, right?
Mm.
Then if this 16 hours involves skipping breakfast, we now have seen many studies, meta-analysis now, studies of all studies showing shortened lifespan and more cardiovascular disease. That's very clear, right? That's an association, right? Nobody can do a trial, lasting 20 years. But seriously, people that fast for 16 hours or so and skip breakfast, they do very poorly. Now, there's a Chinese group that
Right.
proposed it doesn't matter if you skip breakfast, and maybe also if you skip dinner, right? We don't know. That's much less understood.
Mm.
But breakfast skipping is a problem. Now, several trials came up in the last couple of years, but in beginning to explain this. So, for example, one study hospitalized people and brought them into the hospital and gave them exactly the same food. But the food was either started at 8 a.m. or it was started at 12, right? And if it was started at 12, the energy expenditure slowed down, so they were burning less calories, and they were more hungry, right? And
Right.
and I think also there was some sleeping
Mm.
problems. And we know. And so this argues against some of my colleagues are saying, yeah, but the breakfast keepers, this doesn't really apply because breakfast keeper have bad behavior, right? It's just a special population. It's not like the healthy 16-hour people. It's a group that's got problems. Well, that study indicated no, that's not the case. Just by starting, they gave them the food, so they know everybody ate the same. And
Mm.
so, how is it that all of a sudden the one that started 12 are doing worse or much worse? Yeah, so it's probably circadian rhythms, and so you have to start when you first wake up eating, otherwise you see the problems. And this is not the only study, right? There were another study that looked at
Mm.
heavy dinner versus heavy breakfast, and that also showed that the heavy breakfast was the best way to go.
Wow. Because I mean, in this biohacking world, people still love their intermittent. They're sort of, they're not eating until 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. So I'm very, very interested and a little surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I've been surprised for 10 years, right, from the beginning, because when I wrote the longevity diet, maybe you remember, I talk about 5 pillars. I said you cannot just, so in this case, it would be one pillar science, right? Clinical trials, right? So if I did a clinical trial on people and they fasted for 18 hours and another group fasted for, 12, the 18-hour will beat the 12, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So that pillar will suggest that the 18 hours is best. But
Mm.
then everything else, like centenarians, mouse studies, epidemiological data, they are not supportive of that, right? They're not, especially epidemiological data, but also, centenarian studies. I mean, you rarely see centenarians keep breakfast. That's just very unusual. And so, yeah, so I think that there are at least multiple pillars that will argue that 16, 18 hours, 20 hours of fasting is not so good. Also, there's data on gallstone formation, right? And the people that fast for 14 hours, 16 hours or longer, they have a much higher chance of developing gallstones. It's not the end of the world, but it's certainly something that you would like to avoid also, right? So yeah,
Mm.
so
Mm.
there's multiple reasons why it's difficult, the gallstones and the association in multiple pillars with problems.
Yeah. So a sort of a 12 to a 14-hour fast daily, and then the fasting mimicking diet. I mean, every once in a while. Is that the sort of
12
gold
to
standard,
13.
would you say?
Yeah, I would say 12 to 13, right?
12
So
to
so
13.
if,
Yeah.
if you do 13, again, I think most people can still do 13 and do very well, say 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. I think that, yeah. So I would say 12 to 13, and then maybe 3 cycles a year of the fasting mimicking diet, unless you have a reason not to do one of these two, which, you know, yeah. So most people can do it, but some people cannot.
Yeah, fascinating. And then you're so focused on longevity. I wonder, away from diet, are there any things in particular that are an absolute, for example, looking at some of the news stories around you over the recent time, I read something in the Daily Express, which was your advice to walk fast for an hour a day. That's really important. Is that one of your sort of longevity hacks?
Yeah, I didn't say walk fast. Things always get embellished as we go.
That's what the
I
Daily
say walk.
Express said.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly. So I walk an hour a day, and centenarians walk an hour a day. And
Mm.
if you look at every recommendation from medical associations, that's very important, right? And
Mm.
and it's again simple. I mean, two things, like 150 minutes of real exercise per week, right? That's per week, and then 1 hour a day of walking. That's very important, right? It brings you these people that in Sardinia, Okinawa, Loma Linda, all over the world, and in the UK, right? So
Mm.
usually they were active, right? They did not use a car or a vehicle for everything everywhere they had to go, right? So I think it's very important. Do the stairs, just use your body like it's
Mm.
always been meant to be used. And now we're getting to this illusion to think that there is always a trick to avoid doing something, as if
Mm.
that is, so I always say, if you had a pill for exercise, is that a good pill to take, right? I mean, no, I don't think so, right? I think even if you had a pill that was as good as exercise, there is no evidence that there is. I think you still want to exercise. You still want to walk, right? It's also, it's not just a physical benefit, it's a mental benefit. It's about feeling better. I think once you do that 1 hour walking, you feel better, right? You feel like, you don't know why, but it certainly feel like you did the right thing, right? And that's very important. Even the stairs, right? I never touch escalator or elevators, and and that's another important thing. There's a famous picture of a gym and everybody on the escalator, right? I always use it when
Yeah,
so
yeah,
at the top of the escalator there is a gym, right? So that's what we're doing.
yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else that you think is sort of important for longevity? Obviously, we've seen the various research around blue zones, and a lot of it is quite simple stuff. But I wonder if there's anything else that you're particularly keen on, or something that's emerged recently that you're very convinced by.
Yeah, I think that we're very keen about personalization, right? So don't feel that, you have to have the Mediterranean diet. The Okinawan diet is as good as the Mediterranean. I think it's very important to personalize it, right? Think
Mm,
about what you bothers you and you're happy with, right? So,
mm,
and think about your ancestors, right? So so think about, let's say, the longevity diet that I wrote book, and or the Mediterranean diet. So think about the type of ingredients, but then personalize it to yourself, because you're much more likely to do well with things that have been part of your country's or your area of the world diet for centuries.
yeah. Very, very good. And then before we finish, Prolon, I've very much enjoyed taking this a couple of times. For people who haven't tried it, it's basically the fasting mimicking diet, but something you can actually stick to, isn't it?
Yeah, I cannot talk about products, but certainly you did, and yeah. So now I'm actually very proud of the fact that it's available in many countries, fairly inexpensive,
Mm,
and so yeah. So we I think over probably 1 million people have done it now, and and it just moving forward with lots of universities doing trials, and good, neutral, or bad. And so far it's been remarkably good, but I'm sure sooner or later we're going to see some negative results. But that's the way to do it, and that should be the standard for every drug out there. I'm not sure it is, but that's we need to have things that
mm,
are tested independently, not tested because a drug company sponsors the trial. And that's what you get out there. So this is
yeah.
why we don't always know, is it really working, is it really good for me, or is it simply FDA approved based on trials that had a lot of people from the pharmaceutical company working on the trial, right?
Mm, mm,
That's where I think uh, podcasters and journalists should should do more, right? Should do more in saying, hey, because I would want it for our own FMD and say, hey, this was not done, this was paid by the company, so should we believe it, right? Or no, this was not paid by the company, this was done by whatever university. And yeah, so those are worth 100 times more than the type of trials that have an
yeah.
influence by the company.
Well, that's what we're trying to do. Constantly trying to scratch away at the truth. Sometimes it's hard.
No, I know.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think when you look at the longevity space now? Because I mean, I've been doing this podcast for 10 years, Walter, and I've had the likes of Sachin Panda and David Sinclair on, and I find it really interesting that this space is sort of divided in two to a certain extent. Those who like the simple pleasures in life, the grounding and the sunlight and the good food and that sort of thing, and then the Brian Johnsons of this world who are spending millions on the plasma transfers and all the rest of it. But when you look at the world of longevity these days, what do you think and where do you see it going?
I mean, I think eventually it's going to go to the science fiction area, right? There is no doubt. Like AI, unfortunately, I think AI should be much more regulated, and eventually longevity should be regulated.
Mm,
Uh, but I think for the next probably realistically 20-25 years, we don't want to take the type of gamble that Brian Johnson is taking, and you want to have a team of experts that are number one focusing on do no harm, right? So what is that is out there that is extremely unlikely that will hurt you, and that's got very good evidence of making you healthier and potentially longer lived, right? So I think, yeah, that's what we need to focus on. And I think nutrition is going to win out, and and this is based on facts, right? I mean, calorie restriction and some of the things that cannot be done by people, but are dietary in nature, and they're clearly working better than anything else than anybody's ever tested, right? So I think we're still far from the say, let's say, cellular reprogramming, stem cell based effects, and the sort of the type of biohack that might cause autophagy, right? The cell to eat itself in a way that is so coordinated and so sophisticated that it's going to make you live longer. Now, keep in mind. So if we think about a drug, like say, a biohack, a drug is a biohack, right? So if you think about a drug, we think of it as a very sophisticated intervention. Let's say GLP-1, right? So now it's activating the GLP-1 receptor, right? And but it's in fact not so sophisticated, right? Like it is a statin, like there is blocking cholesterol synthesis. It's either activating something or blocking something. It's not part of a sophisticated program that has a job to do, right? So if you look at, for example, a fasting mimicking diet, you have thousands of genes that go to work for a purpose for which they were trained, right? So for example, we publish on kidney damage. So we damage the kidney of a rat, then we start the fasting mimicking diet and refeeding cycle, and we see the kidney knowing exactly how to go back into its original, function, right? It's really
Wow.
remarkable.
Yeah.
But a drug is fairly unsophisticated, right? So I think that eventually we're going to need to replace the program, right? How can we get, so that's going to be the solution, right? How can we have a program that is, it can take the damaged components and bring it back to more youthful or younger, function? And that's very difficult to do, right? Because again, it involves potentially tens of thousands of genes, but a very precise level of each gene and timing of it, right? So now see how distant the drug is from the sophistication needed to make somebody younger, and without doing damage, ever, right? So Brian Johnson, or whoever, you have to be careful because any event could be very bad, right? You only need one problem, like cancer, for example, it can be one mutation in one gene, right? Just one single base substitution in the DNA can certainly, do a lot to promote cancer in a person, right? So this is how, this is how delicate we are, right? So this is how delicate we are, how delicate the system is, and if you just tweak the wrong thing one time, that could cost you dearly, right? This is why I think that we need to focus first on the things that are safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Final question, Walter. Very important. Does coffee break a fast?
I mean, generally not, right? Generally not, but coffee is also a habit. And, it's a good habit. Actually, coffee is now being associated with a lot of benefits. But I think if you could do it, it's not a bad idea to say, do you have to have coffees every day? Can't you just, this is, for example, people that do the 5-day fasting mimicking diet, right? They'll say, well, can I stop coffee? And we say, if you get to the point where you have a headache and you can't stand it anymore, have a half a cup or 1 cup and then move on, right? But if you don't get in that situation, then don't have it, right? It's okay. It's 5 days. The rest of the year you can have coffee, and you can have 2 or 3 coffees a day. And I think it's important to also, get rid of the things that you always felt are a must in your nutrition.
Yeah, certainly when I did the fasting mimicking diet, firstly, I couldn't do without coffee. And secondly, I noticed that the really big thing was my relationship with food and how it made me feel. It's sort of like an emotional crutch, isn't it? And you sort of think, oh, I've only got a soup left for the rest of the day. I can't stuff my face with whatever it is I would normally stuff it. It's very interesting how it shines a light and makes you appreciate food again once you finish that 5 days.
Yeah, but if you, this is why it needs to be realistically only say 3 or 4 times a year, right?
Mm, mm,
Because as you start pushing people to do what you just described too many times, then that's what you get. You get a, I don't want to do this anymore, right? And
mm,
this is
mm,
very important to say, hey, go back, don't worry about it. Now, we'll talk about it in 4 months from now. And
mm,
yeah, so that I think that I kind of knew this from the beginning, but there was an hypothesis. Now we're starting to see, yes, because of that freedom, we are getting closer to something that most people can do versus
mm.
1% of the population.
Mm. Walter, it's been really good to talk to you, and I've sort of almost been surprised by how moderate you are. There's a lot of extreme people in our space, and you're really focused on getting the masses to follow this stuff. So yeah, it's been a
Yeah.
pleasure and an eye opener. Thanks very much for coming on. Where can people find out more about you and all your work and your books as well?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, Professor Valter Longo, Facebook, and then the foundation is called Create Cures Foundation and Clinics, and it's a nonprofit that we follow thousands of patients. So that I encourage people to contact the foundation if they want to be followed directly by the foundation staff.
And I encourage people to read your books as well. They've been a bit of a game changer for me. So thank you very much indeed. And thanks for coming on Biohacking News as well.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Walter. That's absolutely
All right.
brilliant. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thanks a lot. Bye.
Really enjoyed that. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.